The North Sea churned black and endless beneath a sky heavy with rain clouds that never seemed to break. November 1939. The war was only weeks old, but the waters off the British coast had already become a graveyard. Merchant ships went down in sudden explosions that left no warning, no trace, just debris and oil slicks spreading like dark blood across the waves. In a cramped office at the Admiralty Building in London, Commander Richard Lewis stood before a wall-sized map of the British Isles, red pins marking each sinking. 17 ships in 3 weeks. The pattern was unmistakable. German magnetic mines were being deployed with terrifying efficiency, dropped from aircraft under cover of darkness into shipping lanes that Britain depended on for survival. Each pin represented not just a vessel lost, but sailors drowned in freezing water, cargo desperately needed for the war effort now resting on the ocean floor. Lewis was a thin man with sharp eyes that hadn't known real sleep since September. His hands, stained with ink and tobacco, trembled slightly as he lit another cigarette. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling while outside, London prepared for another blackout night. The city was learning to live in darkness, but the darkness at sea was something else entirely. A calculated, invisible threat that could end the war before it truly began. 17, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible above the rain now pattering against the windows. 17, and we still can't stop them. The magnetic mine was a weapon of elegant cruelty. Unlike traditional contact mines that exploded when a ship struck them, these devices sat on the seabed, waiting. When a steel-hulled vessel passed overhead, the mine's magnetic sensor detected the disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field and detonated. The explosion would rip through the hull from below, the most vulnerable point. Ships didn't have time to send distress signals. Crews didn't have time to reach lifeboats. British minesweepers, designed to cut the mooring cables of conventional mines, were useless against this new threat. The Royal Navy was fighting blind, losing ships to an enemy they couldn't see and didn't fully understand. Every convoy that left port was a gamble. Every captain who sailed from harbor might not return. Lewis's colleague, Lieutenant James Uvery, entered the office carrying a stack of reports. Uvery was younger, an explosives expert pulled from a training command to help solve the crisis. His uniform was immaculate despite the long hours, a contrast to Lewis's disheveled appearance. "The Admiralty is asking questions again," Uvery said, setting the reports on Lewis's desk. "They want to know when we'll have a solution." Lewis didn't turn from the map. "Tell them we need one of the damn things intact. Until we can examine a German magnetic mine, we're just guessing." They know that. They also know German mine-laying aircraft are active every night. The Thames estuary, the Channel approaches, they're saturating our waters. Then we need to get lucky. Lewis finally turned to face Uvery. "We need one of their mines to fail. To land somewhere we can reach it before the Germans realize their mistake." Luck in war was a currency more valuable than gold. The same night, 70 miles away in the coastal town of Schuberines, a German Heinkel He-115 floatplane droned through the darkness at 3,000 feet. Inside the cramped cabin, Lieutenant Hans Dietrich checked his instruments one final time. The magnetic mines secured in his aircraft's belly represented months of German engineering, weapons that were winning the war at sea without firing a shot. Dietrich's orders were simple: drop the mines in the shipping channels off the Thames estuary, return to base, file the report. He'd flown this mission 6 times before. Tonight was routine. But routine was the first casualty of war. The release mechanism jammed on the second mine. Dietrich swore, working the lever manually while his navigator called out altitude. The mine finally dropped, but 3 seconds late. Instead of plunging into the deep channel waters, it fell onto the exposed mudflats at low tide, half a mile from the intended drop zone. Neither man in the aircraft knew. The darkness below hid everything. Dietrich marked the drop as successful in his log and turned for home, the He-115's engines fading into the North Sea night. On the mudflats, the magnetic mine settled into the soft mud, its parachute draped across it like a shroud. The tide was going out. In 6 hours, it would return. The mine's safety mechanisms were designed to activate only when submerged. Until then, it was inert, 1,000 pounds of German technology waiting in the darkness. And in London, Commander Lewis crushed out his cigarette and stared at the map, willing the tide of red pins to stop spreading. The hunt for a solution had begun, though no one yet knew how close salvation lay in the November mud. The call came at 0340 hours. Lieutenant Overy was pulled from a dreamless sleep by the duty officer's voice crackling through the telephone line. "Sir, we have a report. A German mine, possibly intact, on the mudflats at Shoeburyness. Local constable spotted it during low-tide patrol." Overy was already reaching for his uniform. "Has it been approached?" "No, sir. Area's been cordoned off. The tide's rising. If we're going to recover it, it has to be now." 20 minutes later, Overy was in a staff car racing through blacked-out London streets toward the coast. Beside him sat Chief Petty Officer Baldwin, a career naval man with steady hands and a reputation for working with explosives that made other men nervous. Neither spoke much during the drive. Both understood what they were racing toward, a device designed to sink ships now sitting exposed, unstable, potentially armed. Dawn was still an hour away when they reached Shoeburyness. The mudflat stretched out before them like a gray wasteland under the pale beam of shielded torches. The tide had turned and was creeping back across the flats, fingers of water reaching toward the dark shape visible 200 yards offshore. "There," said the constable who'd found it, pointing with a shaking hand. "Been there since I started my patrol. Didn't dare get close." Overy raised his binoculars. The mine was massive, larger than he'd expected, with a parachute collapsed around it. The casing gleamed dully in the torchlight, and he could make out German markings on the side. His heart hammered against his ribs. "How long until high tide covers it?" he asked. "An hour. Maybe less." Baldwin came up beside him, studying the distance. 200 yards across soft mud. "Carrying that thing back will be slow work." "We don't have to carry it all at once," Overy said, making a decision that would either save thousands of lives or end his own in the next hour. "We examine it there. Take measurements, photographs, understand how it works. Then we defuse it if we can." "And if we can't?" Overy looked at the older man. "Then we make sure someone else gets the information we've gathered." They moved out as the first gray light touched the eastern horizon. Each step across the mudflats was a negotiation with the soft ground that tried to hold their boots. The water was ankle-deep now, rising steadily. Overy carried a camera and notebook. Baldwin had a toolkit that clinked softly with each movement. The mine grew larger as they approached, a cylindrical monster nearly 8 feet long, wider than a man's outstretched arms. The parachute had protected it from damage, and Overy could see immediately that the casing was intact. His hands were steady as he began photographing it from every angle, the camera shutter clicking in the pre-dawn silence. "Magnetic trigger system," Baldwin muttered, crouching beside the mine's nose. "See these sensor heads? They're detecting changes in the magnetic field. When a ship passes over." "Boom," Overy finished. He was sketching frantically in his notebook, capturing every detail. The water was at their calves now, cold and insistent. "We need to get inside," Overy said. "See the firing mechanism, the detonator arrangement." Baldwin's jaw tightened. "Sir, we don't know if movement will trigger it. We don't know if there's a time delay. We don't know anything except that this thing is designed to destroy ships that weigh thousands of tons. Which is exactly why we have to understand it." Overy set down his notebook and pulled a screwdriver from Baldwin's kit. "If we die, at least the photographs and sketches make it back. But if we succeed, we save every convoy trying to reach Britain." The chief petty officer nodded slowly. "Where do we start?" "The access panel. Here, along the side." Overy's hands found the recessed bolts. German engineering was precise, methodical. The bolts turned smoothly despite being submerged. Each rotation felt like a lifetime. The water reached their knees. Behind them, on the shore, a small crowd had gathered. Military officers, civilians, all watching the two figures hunched over the massive mine as the North Sea reclaimed its territory. No one spoke. What was there to say? Overy removed the last bolt and carefully lifted the panel away. Inside was a maze of wiring, switches, and mechanisms that would have looked at home in a watchmaker's shop. German precision engineering at its finest and deadliest. "Clock mechanism," Baldwin breathed. "Jesus Christ, it's got an automatic arming system." Overy leaned closer, water now at mid-thigh. His notebook was getting wet, the ink starting to run. He sketched faster, capturing the layout of the detonator system, the arrangement of the explosive charges surrounding the central magnetic sensor. "The mine arms itself after a set time underwater," he said, thinking aloud. "That's why the parachute, it needs to land softly, stay intact. Once submerged, the clock starts. After the preset time, the magnetic sensors go live." "How long?" "No way to know without." Overy trailed off, staring at a small dial visible deep inside the mechanism. Numbers in German. A needle pointing to a setting. His blood went cold. "Baldwin, this mine has been armed for 40 minutes. The chief petty officer's face didn't change, but Overy saw his knuckles whiten on the tool he was holding. "How long until it's live?" "The dial shows 60 minutes. We have 20 minutes, maybe less, before the sensors activate and any magnetic disturbance will detonate it." The water was at their waists now, lapping against the mine's casing. Each wave that rolled in brought the North Sea closer to reclaiming what the Germans had dropped. The mine would disappear beneath the surface, lost forever, or worse, it would detonate when the rising water triggered the sensors prematurely. "We need to move faster," Overy said, his voice tight. "Take photographs of everything. I'll sketch the detonator mechanism. We have to assume we won't be able to defuse this." "We're not leaving it armed," Baldwin said flatly. "We might not have a choice." For the next 15 minutes, the two men worked in desperate silence, broken only by the click of the camera and the scratch of pencil on wet paper. Overy's hands cramped from the cold water, from the tension of working around explosives that could vaporize them both without warning. Baldwin photographed the detonator from every angle, his movements methodical despite the water now at chest height. The mine shifted slightly, settling deeper into the mud. Both men froze. Nothing happened. No click, no hum, no explosion. Just the sound of water and their own ragged breathing. "The detonator," Baldwin said quietly. "I think I can remove it. See here. It's a separate unit, connected to the main charge by these leads. If we disconnect it—" "We don't know if there's a tamper switch," Overy countered. "German engineering. They'd build in protections against exactly what we're trying to do." "Then we're dead either way." Baldwin looked at Overy, and in that moment the difference in rank meant nothing. Two men, two choices, one bomb. "I say we try." Overy thought of the map in Lewis's office. 17 red pins. 17 ships. Hundreds of sailors dead, thousands more at risk every day the magnetic mine secret remained intact. "Do it," he said. Baldwin's hands disappeared into the freezing water, feeling blindly for the connection points he'd photographed moments before. The water was at their shoulders now. Overy held a waterproof torch, its beam cutting through the murky water to illuminate the mechanism. "First lead disconnected," Baldwin grunted. "The mine didn't explode. Second lead." A wave rolled over them, and for a moment both men were submerged, holding their breath, hands still working in the cold darkness. When they surfaced, gasping, Baldwin had the detonator in his hands. "Got it," he said, voice shaking not from fear but from cold. The bastards defused. Overy wanted to laugh, to cry, to collapse in the water from relief. Instead, he grabbed his notebook. "Help me with the magnetic sensor assembly. We need to understand the whole system." They worked until the water forced them back, until their fingers were too numb to turn screws or hold tools. By the time they retreated to shore, soaked and shivering, they had photographed and documented every critical component of Germany's secret weapon. On the beach, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by anxious officers, Overy clutched his waterlogged notebook like it was the crown jewels. "Get this to the Admiralty," he told the waiting courier. "Commander Lewis needs to see it immediately. We know how the magnetic mine works. Now we can beat it." But understanding the weapon was only the first step. Using that knowledge would require one more act of unauthorized brilliance, and the stakes were about to get much higher. Commander Lewis spread the photographs across his desk like tarot cards predicting Britain's future. Overy's sketches, still damp at the edges, showed the internal mechanism of the German magnetic mine in exquisite detail. Every wire, every switch, every crucial component laid bare. "Magnificent work," Lewis said quietly. "Absolutely magnificent." Overy sat across from him, still in borrowed dry clothes, exhausted but wired on adrenaline and strong tea. "We understand the trigger mechanism now, sir. The magnetic sensors, the arming sequence, the detonator arrangement. But understanding isn't the same as countering." "No," Lewis agreed. He picked up one of the sketches, a detailed drawing of the magnetic sensor assembly. "But this gives us options. If we know how the mine detects ships, we can theoretically neutralize the detection method." "Degaussing," said a new voice from the doorway. Both men turned. Commander Charles Gedive entered, carrying a leather folder stuffed with papers. Gedive was a scientist in uniform, pulled from civilian research to work on naval problems. His mind worked in equations and magnetic field theories that made career sailors' heads spin. "Degaussing," Lewis repeated. Gedive set his folder on the desk and pulled out a technical diagram. "If the German mines detect ships by sensing disturbances in Earth's magnetic field caused by steel hulls, then we eliminate the disturbance. We degauss the ships, wrap them in electrical cable that generates an opposing magnetic field. The ship becomes magnetically neutral. The mine sensors don't detect anything to trigger on." Overy leaned forward, studying the diagram. "Could it work?" "In theory, yes. In practice?" Gedive hesitated. "We'd need to install coiling systems on every ship in the Royal Navy and the merchant fleet. Thousands of vessels. Each installation would take days, require precise calculations based on the ship's size and hull composition. And we'd need to do it all before Germany realizes we've compromised their mine technology." Lewis lit a cigarette, his mind racing through implications. How long to develop a working system? "We already have," Gedive said. "Unauthorized research started 2 months ago based on theoretical work about magnetic mine defenses. I took the liberty of not waiting for official approval." The room went silent. "You built a degaussing system," Lewis said slowly, "without authorization from the Admiralty." "I built several prototypes, tested them on decommissioned hulls. The mathematics work. The physics work. All I needed was confirmation of how the German magnetic sensor operates." He gestured to Overy's sketches. "Which you've just provided." Lewis stood and walked to the window. Outside, London was preparing for another night under blackout. Ships in the Thames were anchored, waiting for orders, captains wondering if their next voyage would be their last. The weight of 17 red pins pressed on him like physical force. "If you're wrong," Lewis said without turning, "and a ship degaussed with your system still detonates a mine, the Admiralty will court-martial you. Possibly me as well for allowing it. And if we do nothing, Gedive replied, Germany continues sinking ships until Britain starves or surrenders. Which scenario troubles you more, Commander? Lewis turned back to face them. His expression had changed, the exhaustion replaced by something harder, more determined. How quickly can you install the system on an active vessel? 72 hours for a destroyer. Longer for larger ships. You have 48, Lewis said. HMS Wellington is in Portsmouth for repairs. She's scheduled to escort a convoy through the Channel in 3 days. That convoy route is heavily mined. We've lost 4 ships there in the past week. Overy's eyes widened. Sir, you're proposing we test an unauthorized defense system on a live convoy? If it fails... If it fails, we've lost 1 more destroyer in a war that's already costing us ships daily, Lewis interrupted. But if it succeeds, we've broken the back of Germany's most effective naval weapon. We install Gedive's system on Wellington, send her through the minefields, and pray to whatever god is listening that the mathematics are sound. The crew, Overy said. Do they know they'll be the test case? Captain Mason is a volunteer. I spoke with him this morning. Lewis crushed out his cigarette. He understands the risks. He also understands that doing nothing guarantees more British sailors die. He's willing to trust the science. Gedive gathered his papers. I'll need a team. Electrical specialists, welders, mathematicians to calculate the precise field strength needed for Wellington's hull composition. You'll have whoever you need, Lewis promised. This stays between us until we know if it works. The Admiralty doesn't need to know about unauthorized systems until we can show them results. The next 48 hours became a blur of frantic activity. In Portsmouth, HMS Wellington sat in dry dock while Gedive's team swarmed over her like ants on a carcass. Electrical cable was wound around the destroyer's hull in precise patterns calculated to generate a magnetic field exactly opposing the disturbance her steel hull created in Earth's natural field. Captain James Mason watched the installation from the dock, smoking his pipe and trying not to think about the fact that his ship was being turned into a floating experiment. Wellington was a Grimsby-class sloop, not large as warships went, but capable and nimble. She carried a crew of 85 men, most of whom had no idea their vessel was being prepared to test an unproven system against mines that had already killed hundreds. The coiling will reduce our top speed by half a knot, Gedive explained, pointing to the cables now visible along Wellington's hull. But it won't affect maneuverability. The electrical system draws power from the main generators, so you'll need to ensure they stay running at all times once we activate the field. And if a mine detonates anyway? Mason asked. Gedive met his eyes. Then the mathematics were wrong, and we learned that lesson the hard way. Mason nodded slowly. At least it'll be quick. On the 3rd day, Wellington put to sea. The November sky was iron-gray, and a bitter wind chopped the channel into white-capped confusion. Mason stood on his bridge, watching Portsmouth harbor recede, knowing that somewhere beneath the dark water ahead lay dozens, perhaps hundreds, of German magnetic mines. The convoy he was escorting consisted of 12 merchant ships carrying food, fuel, and ammunition. 4 other destroyers provided protection, but none had the degaussing system. If Wellington's passage through the minefields proved the system worked, those ships would be retrofitted immediately. If Wellington exploded in a tower of water and flame, the other destroyers would at least know what not to try. Degaussing system active, sir, reported the chief engineer over the voice pipe. Generator output steady. Magnetic field reading shows proper opposition to hull signature. Very well. Mason's voice was calm, betraying none of the tension coiling in his gut. All ahead standard. Maintain convoy formation. The minutes crawled past like hours. Wellington cut through the grey water, her bow throwing spray that the wind caught and flung across the FSS. Below decks, men worked at their stations, unaware that beneath them, German mines sat waiting, their magnetic sensors reaching upward like invisible fingers searching for steel. "Entering the minefield sector now, sir," called the navigator. "Based on previous sinkings, we should expect concentrated mine presence for the next 5 miles." Mason said nothing. His hands gripped the bridge railing, knuckles white. Every second that passed without an explosion was a small victory. Every 100 yards was a miracle. 1 mile. 2 miles. Wellington sailed on, untouched. 3 miles, and Mason began to believe. The degaussing system was working. Gedive's unauthorized mathematics were holding up against German engineering. Then the explosion came. Not under Wellington, but 200 yards to starboard. One of the merchant ships, a freighter loaded with grain, erupted in a column of water and fire. The blast was enormous, the pressure wave hitting Wellington's hull like a physical blow. Men on the bridge were thrown sideways. Mason grabbed for support as his ship heeled in the water. "Damage report," he shouted. "No damage to Wellington, sir." The explosion was the merchant vessel Lady Margaret. "She's going down." Mason grabbed his binoculars. Through the spray and smoke, he could see the freighter listing heavily, her back broken by the mine blast. Men were jumping into the freezing water, tiny figures vanishing into the gray chaos. "Come about. Prepare to recover survivors." But even as Wellington turned toward the sinking ship, Mason understood what had happened. The freighter hadn't been degaussed. She'd passed over a mine that Wellington had sailed past moments before. The same mine, the same magnetic trigger, but the freighter's undisguised steel hull had activated the sensors that ignored Wellington's neutralized field. The degaussing system worked. It actually worked. "Signal to Admiralty," Mason ordered, his voice tight with emotion. "Degaussing system proven effective. Recommend immediate fleet-wide installation." Wellington spent the next hour pulling survivors from the water. 12 men were saved. 23 went down with the Lady Margaret. But as the destroyer resumed her position with the convoy, Mason knew that those 23 might be the last British sailors to die to German magnetic mines, if Gedive's unauthorized system could be installed fast enough. The secret was out. The solution was proven. But the race was far from over. The Admiralty boardroom was silent as Commander Lewis finished his report. Across the mahogany table, a dozen senior officers sat absorbing what they just heard. Unauthorized mine recovery, unauthorized degaussing research, unauthorized combat testing. All conducted without official sanction, all in violation of proper channels and procedures. And all successful. Admiral Sir Charles Forbes, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, set down the technical specifications Gedive had prepared. His face was unreadable. "You took it upon yourself," he said slowly, "to develop, install, and test an experimental defensive system on one of His Majesty's warships without authorization from this board or the Director of Naval Intelligence." "Yes, sir," Lewis said. No point in denying it. The evidence was laid out before them. Photographs of the recovered mine, Overy's sketches, Gedive's calculations, Mason's combat report. HMS Wellington could have been destroyed. Her crew lost. The convoy left without adequate protection. "Yes, sir." Forbes leaned back in his chair. The other officers watched him, waiting for the explosion of military discipline that would surely come. Court-martial. Dismissal. Disgrace. Instead, Forbes smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, addressing the full board, "we are looking at the most significant intelligence coup of the war thus far. In the space of 1 week, these men have identified, recovered, analyzed, and developed a defense against Germany's most effective naval weapon. The magnetic mine has cost us 79 ships since September. As of today, it will cost us no more." He turned back to Lewis. "I'm recommending you for immediate promotion. Gedive and Overy as well. As for the unauthorized nature of your work—" Forbes's smile widened slightly. Sometimes the greatest victories require forgiveness rather than permission. The king will be most interested to hear how British initiative trumped German engineering. The tension in the room broke. Officers who had been preparing to condemn were suddenly offering congratulations. Gedive was summoned to explain his degaussing mathematics to admirals who barely understood basic algebra. Uvry found himself retelling the story of the Schuberines recovery to an audience that hung on every word. But Lewis stepped away from the celebration, moving to the window that overlooked the Thames. Below, ships moved through the murky water, and he knew that within days, each would be equipped with a coiling system that would make them invisible to the mines waiting in the dark. The cost came to him then, not in congratulations or promotions, but in the quiet mathematics of war. The Lady Margaret had gone down with 23 men. But in proving the degaussing system worked, those 23 had saved thousands. Ships that would have been sunk would now sail safely. Convoys that would have been decimated would reach port intact. Britain would continue to eat, to arm, to fight. 23 lives for thousands. The cold calculus of survival. 6 months later, in June 1940, the German Navy quietly abandoned magnetic mine operations in British waters. Degaussing had been installed fleet-wide, not just in Britain but shared with Allied navies worldwide. The mines still sat on the seabed, but they were harmless now, waiting for magnetic signatures that never came. Lieutenant Uvry, now promoted to commander, stood on the same mudflats at Schuberines where he'd defused the mine that changed everything. The tide was out, revealing gray mud stretching to the horizon. Somewhere under that mud might still be German mines, relics of a strategy that had failed. He thought about the moment when Baldwin had pulled the detonator free, both of them submerged in freezing water, death a single wrong movement away. He thought about Captain Mason sailing Wellington through the minefields with nothing but faith in mathematics to protect his crew. He thought about the engineers who'd worked 48 hours straight to install a system that existed only in theory, betting their lives and others on the accuracy of calculations. Unauthorized. Every critical step had been unauthorized. Uvry recovering the mine before confirming with superiors. Gedive developing the degaussing system without approval. Lewis authorizing the Wellington test without consulting the Admiralty Board. If any of them had followed proper procedures, waited for official sanction, gone through channels, Britain would still be losing ships. The war might already be lost. Sometimes, Uvry thought, the most important decisions are the ones you make without permission. A staff car pulled up on the road behind him. Commander Gedive stepped out, still looking uncomfortable in his naval uniform despite 6 months of wearing it. He joined Uvry on the mudflats, both men staring at the gray expanse where a German mine had landed by accident and become Britain's salvation. "They're calling it the greatest intelligence coup of the war," Gedive said. "They're not wrong. Do you ever think about what would have happened if the mine had landed 50 yards further out? Deep water instead of mudflats. We'd never have recovered it." Uvry nodded. "I think about that constantly. About all the things that had to go exactly right for this to work. The jammed release mechanism that caused the late drop. The low tide that exposed it. The constable who spotted it. You having already started degaussing research before we knew it would be needed. Any one of those things goes differently, and—" "We don't win the Battle of the Atlantic," Gedive finished. "Germany starves Britain into submission by Christmas 1940. They stood in silence, contemplating the weight of accident and initiative, of luck and unauthorized action combining to shift the course of history. "The Admiralty has asked me to continue development work," Gedive said. "Other defensive systems against German technology. They've given me a blank check and complete authorization to pursue whatever research I think necessary." "Ironic, isn't it?" Uvry smiled. "They're authorizing you to work without authorization. I think they've learned that sometimes the best results come from people willing to take risks without waiting for permission. The war's too fast, the stakes too high for everything to go through proper channels. Uvri turned away from the mudflats, back toward the waiting car. 23 men died on the Lady Margaret, proving the system worked. I think about them too. About whether they knew, in those final moments, that their deaths would save thousands. They were sailors, Gedive said quietly. They knew the risks when they went to sea. But because of what we did, unauthorized or not, thousands of other sailors will come home who wouldn't have otherwise. The tide was turning, water beginning its slow reclaim of the mudflats. In a few hours, this whole stretch would be underwater again, invisible and unknowable. But the mine that had rested here was gone, its secrets extracted, its threat neutralized. One unauthorized blueprint had sunk an entire German strategy. One moment of initiative had changed the war. And as Uvri and Gedive drove back to London, the North Sea behind them carried ships sailing safely through minefields that would never claim them, protected by mathematics and cable and the courage of men who'd chosen to act rather than wait for permission. The war would rage for 5 more years. Britain would face darker days, closer calls, moments when survival seemed impossible. But the Battle of the Atlantic, the invisible struggle in the dark water that could have ended everything, had been won in those few desperate days of November 1939. Won by an unauthorized recovery on mudflats at low tide. Won by unauthorized research in a laboratory without official approval. Won by an unauthorized test in mine-infested waters. Won by men who understood that sometimes saving the world requires breaking the rules.